Before you dismiss this as imagination, before you tell yourself, was just another day, I need you to pause and listen carefully. Because January 30 was not normal, and I say that as someone who once helped create days like that. When I was involved in witchcraft, there were specific dates we prepared for, not because of superstition, but because of spiritual timing. Certain days carried assignments, others carried resistance, and a few carried a strange, heavy atmosphere that affected even people who knew nothing about the occult. January 30 fell into that category. You didn't need to believe in anything to feel it. Many of you woke up tired for no clear reason, emotionally flat, heavy in your chest, mentally foggy. Prayer felt harder, motivation dipped, even conversations felt draining. And you couldn't explain why. That's not coincidence. In the occult, we understood something most people never consider. Atmospheres can be released before people are aware of them. Not attacks in the dramatic sense, but pressure, weight, emotional heaviness designed to slow momentum as people move toward transition. And late January is a transition window. I remember standing in gatherings where the goal wasn't to harm people, but to delay them, to make them tired right before clarity, to make them discouraged right before breakthrough, to make them question themselves right before alignment. Heavy days are not meant to destroy you. They are meant to slow you down long enough to miss something. That's why January 30 mattered. I'm speaking now because I walked away from that system. I broke covenant. And once you've seen how atmospheres are manipulated, you can't unsee it. You recognize the patterns not with fear, but with clarity. This video is not about panic, it's about understanding. I'm going to explain why January 30 felt heavier than normal, what was actually happening in the spiritual atmosphere, and why some of you felt pressure without having any personal reason for it. And I need you to stay with me, because the heaviness you felt was not a sign of weakness. It was a sign that something was shifting, and pressure always shows up right before movement. Let's talk about what really happened. This is where I need you to listen without fear, because what I'm about to explain is not mystical speculation. It's pattern recognition. In the occult, January is not treated like a beginning. It's treated like a setup month. The real concern is the final third of the month, when momentum begins to form and people subconsciously start moving out of reset mode and into execution. January 30 sits right in that window. And that's why the heaviness didn't feel personal, it felt global. When we wanted to interrupt progress, we didn't target individuals first. We released atmosphere, confusion, fatigue, emotional weight, not strong enough to alarm you, just heavy enough to slow you. That's exactly how January 30 felt for many of you. You weren't attacked. You were pressed to postpone decisions, pressed to delay conversations, pressed to stay in bed longer, pressed to scroll instead of pray, pressed to question motivation you had just days before. That pressure has one goal: delay. I remember planning operations where the instruction was simple: don't break them, slow them. Because slowed people miss timing, and timing is everything. That's why prayer felt strange for some of you. Not blocked, just harder to enter. Your words didn't disappear, they just felt heavier to lift. That's a classic atmospheric tactic. And here's the key detail most people miss. If the heaviness was personal, it would have pointed to a personal issue. But many of you felt it without any identifiable cause. That's how you know it wasn't about you. In the occult, we track days like this carefully, not to celebrate, but to measure effectiveness. And whenever people pushed through, prayed anyway, rested without guilt, refused to self-blame, the atmosphere weakened quickly. That's why some of you felt relief later that same day. The pressure lifted once it failed to achieve delay. January 30 was designed to interrupt flow, not because you're failing, but because something ahead of you matters. In the next chapter, I'm going to explain why sensitive people felt it the most and why heaviness often targets those closest to clarity. This will help you stop blaming yourself and start responding correctly. Stay with me. This part is important because many of you misread the signal. When January 30 hit, the people who felt it the strongest were not the weakest ones. They were the most spiritually sensitive. And in the occult, we knew this pattern very well. Heavy atmospheres don't affect everyone equally. People who are distracted, numb, or spiritually disengaged often move through these days without noticing much at all. But people who are prayerful, reflective, discerning, or in a season of transition feel it immediately in their body, their emotions, and their spirit. That's not a flaw, that's sensitivity. In witchcraft, we targeted sensitivity because sensitive people are close to awareness. They're usually on the edge of a decision, a shift, a release, or a breakthrough they haven't fully articulated yet. Pressure shows up where movement is about to happen. I remember being taught that before clarity increases, resistance often spreads outward, not inward. It fills the atmosphere so that people start questioning themselves instead of moving forward. That's exactly what many of you experienced. You didn't suddenly feel sinful. You didn't feel attacked by temptation. You just felt heavy, slower, less clear. And the most dangerous outcome of that heaviness is not fatigue, it's self-interpretation. People start saying, something must be wrong with me, or maybe I'm off spiritually. That conclusion is what darkness hopes for. Sensitive people often internalize atmospheric pressure as personal failure. And once that happens, clarity dims. Not because it's gone, but because it's being doubted. Here's something we knew very clearly in the occult. When someone starts blaming themselves for external pressure, their discernment weakens temporarily. That's why this kind of heaviness is released broadly. It creates misinterpretation. But there's another detail you need to hear. Many of you felt the heaviness without losing peace completely. You were tired, but not hopeless, slower, but not despairing. That's a sign the atmosphere didn't have permission to settle. It passed because you didn't agree with it fully. That's good news. In the next chapter, I'm going to explain what to do when days like this happen again, so the pressure doesn't linger and doesn't steal momentum. Because understanding the pattern is good, but responding correctly is what keeps you moving forward. This is the part most people never hear because it exposes strategy. In the occult, creating heaviness was never the final goal. Sustaining it was. Anyone can release pressure into the atmosphere. What matters is whether people agree with it long enough for it to take root. Here's how that worked. After a heavy window opened, we were taught to watch for delay behaviors, overthinking, withdrawal, spiritual passivity disguised as rest. People wouldn't fall into obvious sin, they would simply pause their forward motion. And that pause is powerful because momentum is fragile during transition seasons. When someone is close to clarity, purpose, or a necessary decision, even a short delay can cause them to miss timing. That's why heaviness often comes with confusion, not chaos. You weren't pushed into darkness. You were nudged into stillness that felt unproductive. Another tactic was emotional fog. Nothing dramatic, just a dulling of enthusiasm. Prayer felt quieter. Motivation felt muted. Not gone, just distant. That's intentional. When clarity feels far away, people stop acting on what they already know. They wait to feel certain again instead of moving on previous conviction. And here's the most subtle part. We relied on people not naming what they were experiencing. Unidentified pressure has power. Named pressure loses authority. That's why simply recognizing this is atmospheric, not personal, immediately weakens its grip. Many of you unknowingly broke the pattern by continuing small acts, short prayers, routine obedience, quiet resistance. You didn't dramatize the heaviness, and you didn't submit to it either. That's why it didn't stay. In the next chapter, I'm going to show you how to shorten these heavy windows when they come, and how to keep them from interrupting your progress again. Because pressure may pass through, but it doesn't have to park. This is where things shift, because once you understand this, heaviness stops feeling mysterious and starts feeling manageable. In the occult, we were taught that spiritual pressure only stays effective as long as a person remains reactive. The moment someone becomes intentional, the window begins to close. That's why awareness alone is dangerous to darkness. Here's what actually shortens heavy windows. First, movement before motivation. We counted on people waiting until they felt better to act. But feeling follows action, not the other way around. Even small, disciplined movement, speaking one prayer out loud, completing one necessary task, choosing routine over rumination, disrupts the atmosphere. Pressure feeds on hesitation. Second, audible alignment. Silence helps heaviness linger. In occult work, spoken words anchor intention. The same is true in reverse. When someone verbally aligns themselves, declaring truth, scripture, or even simple statements like, I refuse delay, it fractures the fog. You don't need volume, you need agreement. Third, refusing interpretation. This is critical. Heaviness tries to narrate itself. Something is wrong with you. You're off track. You missed it. The moment you start interpreting pressure as meaning, it gains leverage. We trained people to question their calling during these moments because doubt is easier to plant when clarity feels distant. The counter is simple but powerful. Don't explain the feeling, override it. Fourth, maintaining ordinary obedience. Nothing disrupts spiritual interference like consistency, not emotional intensity, not dramatic warfare, just steady obedience, showing up, keeping commitments, continuing prayer even when it feels dry. That consistency signals that timing is protected. And here's the part most people miss: heaviness often breaks suddenly, not gradually. Once the window closes, clarity returns fast, sometimes in a single day. That's not coincidence, that's resistance working. In the final chapter, I'm going to tell you why people who experience January 30's weight are about to feel a sharp lift, and what you must do when clarity returns so you don't waste the release. Because relief is not the finish line, it's the green light.